figured. Is everyone okay with being recorded so we can share it? Yeah. Okay, great.
Just want to say before you start
Yeah.
that whatever orientation Ariel Paul has his phone at is pretty wonderful.
From the ground up.
Took
That's
me a
the
while to figure out. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was like a drum set, maybe. You can see him in the reflection, I think.
He's there.
Makes me think of that bowl of that it's in Harry Potter. What is that you put your head in?
Oh.
And I don't know because I don't know the name in English. I read the books in Portuguese. But I don't know what it's called in English. But you put your head in and then you go back like and you see things from the past. No?
I never read Harry Potter.
What?
I know.
Weird. I don't remember that part.
No, it's this huge bowl with water. No, my God. We say in Portuguese we call penseira. It's like a thinking
It's
bowl.
the pensive.
Yes, thank you, Lucien.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I was gonna be like the sorting hat.
No.
The only thing I know.
Yeah, so this has been a long time coming, this conversation. I think it's been 4 months it's been trying to incarnate since we've been adjusting and shuffling with this wild world here, and it just thought maybe we could start with the calendar of the soul, because it feels like that what lives in this verse here holds a lot of interest around this question around the spirit and life in the spirit. So we'll do this verse here, and then maybe I can just holler at you, and you can say, hey, where you're calling from, so we can have a little map in consciousness about where we are all at geographically. And then I'll basically pass it to Abigail. Yeah, okay. So, how's it going? Welcome. We're live with the CSA pickup here, so I'm gonna be reading a little bit. 22nd week. The light from worldwide spaces works on within with living power. Transformed to light of soul, it shines into the spirit depths, to bring to birth the fruits, whereby out of the self of worlds, the human self in course of time shall ripen. I'm going to try that one again. Hold on.
It's all good now. I just totally missed the whole thing.
Okay, good. Take 2. Don't forget your newsletter, friend.
Yeah.
Okay, great. You're welcome. Here we go. The light from worldwide spaces works on within with living power. Transformed to light of soul, it shines into the spirit depths, to bring to birth the fruits, whereby out of the self of worlds, the human self in course of time shall ripen.
you want to hear the Klocek translation?
Great.
Yeah. Powerful light from the silent periphery lives on in me as the light of the soul. It shines from the soul into the depths of spirit. In the vast cycles of time, soul light will bring forth fruit as the human self ripens to maturity within the cosmic self.
Thank you. Where are you calling from, Ariel Paul?
Yeah, Nelson, traditional Sinaiac territories, Nelson, British Columbia, on the Kootenai, west arm of the Kootenai Lake.
Thank you. How about you, Sophia?
Hello, I'm calling from Pomona, New York.
How about you, Dancey?
I am in Glenmore, Pennsylvania.
Where are you calling from, Chelly?
Hi everyone, I'm calling from traditional Nisenan territory in Auburn, California.
Say again?
Sorry, I'm in traditional Nisenan territory in Auburn, California. Did you hear that time?
Yeah, Nisenan territory. Yeah.
Yeah. And also Maidu, Mountain Maidu, and Valley Miwok people were here.
Hmm.
How about you, Chris?
Yeah, I might need help with, so Bay Area. Maybe Chaley, Johanna can help with that. So I just wanted to mention I'm going up to Mount Shasta, so it's kind of a crazy day. And I was trying to get on the Monday call last week, but this week I'll be driving back, but I'll be on the phone. And I'll be on the phone listening in today. I just want to say hello.
Cool. All right.
Good to see you all.
Yeah. How about you, Johanna?
Hello, everyone. I am in Chestnut Ridge, New York. Happy to be here.
Where are you calling from, Lucien?
I'm in Evanston, which is next to Chicago and too far from Frank.
Right. I'm in Chicago, not too far, but too far to be seeing each other. Frank here. How about you, Gwen?
Hi there. I am in Amherst, Massachusetts right now. Yeah.
Cool. And you, Abigail?
Hi, everybody. My name's Abigail, and I'm calling from Philmont, New York, right next to the well, not right next to, but about 15 miles east of the Hudson River. I'm very near kind of the largest Iroquois territory where the First Nations conventions took place, and Algonquin people are a large population. Ario Paul, I think maybe your face is frozen, but I hear your children right now.
Apologies. You heard the
Welcome back.
conversation about soup?
Yeah.
I like hot soup. I like noodles in my soup. I don't like noodles in my soup. All right, I gotta mute now.
That's good.
We're
Yeah,
getting ready for a trip.
what's that?
We're getting ready for a trip and try to decide what to bring. So,
What kind of soup to bring? Yeah,
yeah.
makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, it's so nice to see you all and to kind of have a space like this with you. Like Frank was saying, this was something we kind of wanted to host back when the virus first started its big spread. And some of you maybe remember we had a Insight open mic at that time with Gopi Krishna and Kristen Buckby, and they spoke a lot, so kind of about the political side of our social response to the pandemic. And I remember coming out of that, and just it's something that I've been kind of wrestling with in general through this whole period of time, is something that I feel like has gotten like a little bit lost, which it usually does, but is just how our relationship to death, what we think about death, how that affects our social response to something like a public health crisis. And two poles that I was kind of experiencing and feeling myself caught between was the one that might be characterized more as anxiety driven, one that's like very much up to date with the current situation and the regulations that are in place and how to safely kind of weather this storm. And the judgments that come out of that position toward those who seem to be just like throwing it all up in the air and doing whatever they want. And then on the other side, those who in some ways appear to be disregarding the serious and painful consequences of what the whole world is going through. And somewhere in between those two camps is like or somewhere underneath all that is like the relationship to death. And so in some ways the sort of anxiety and avoidance and as almost like psychological responses sort of like floating underneath emerged for me as something that I was like felt like I was able to perceive through the social response as a kind of underlying soul comfort or discomfort with death. So I kind of began to ask the question, like, how do we really recognize and acknowledge the fact that the thousands who have died through this pandemic, and the kind of confusion around how to do that, and how might that kind of recognition then affect the way that we approach the pandemic itself. So I for this time I kind of had the idea to hold almost like a little miniature memorial in a way, bring to mind a couple of the individual stories of people who have passed, and then look a little bit more like socio-historically, cosmically, at this moment and its connection to the 1918 flu pandemic, which is an association that, is often being made. and to kind of have conversation in and throughout that. So I brought a little candle and I'm going to light it. I'm going to mention a few people whose stories I've read. And in light of the fact that this this powerful moment is accompanied so much by the social unrest that we're experiencing, and Black Lives Matter becoming such another nodal point for this moment of time, I was kind of captured by several personalities from the African American community who died from the virus, who I just want to bring into the room with us. Let's see. And I'm just going to read a little bit about them to you all. So this is Pastor Kevlin Jones Sr. He died at 72 on March 26th this year. He was a pastor in Flint, Michigan. Iola Jones first met Kevlin Jones when she was 5 years old. She didn't get to know the joyful, funny man who eventually became her husband of 48 years until college. They had 9 children together and raised them in Flint, Michigan. Kevlin was the pastor at the Bountiful Love Ministries Church of God in Christ. His impact was large in the city. During the lead-contaminated water crisis, he asked businesses to donate water. He would sit outside the church with water for people who needed it. Iola said he felt like it was his duty to do this, and he did it because he loved his people and his community. Iola will miss his humor and his energy. Mostly she will miss being able to walk beside him. He was a man of purpose, a man of love, and he did not have to fight for it because it just naturally just flowed from his heart, she said. And I'm not trying to say like my husband never did anything wrong in life, but love conquers all, and he had it down pat. He had it down pat. And here's another bishop from Flint, Michigan. A man by the name of Robert Earl Smith Sr., who died at 82, also on the 26th of March. To Robert Smith's sons, he was a superhero. He was the bishop at 2 churches, Deliverance Church of God in Christ in Flint, and White Cloud Empowerment Center in White Cloud, 150 miles away from his home. He was known for stopping people on the street and asking if he could pray with them. He did this in parks, at the mall, and even knocked on people's doors. He would leave his house at 5 a.m. to arrive in White Cloud in time for the 8 a.m. services. Then he would turn around and arrive back in Flint in time for services at noon. He did this every day, even at age 82. But he always took his wife, Gilda Smith, with him. Gilda has dementia, but her husband took care of her on his own and took her to every service he attended. His son said he took excellent care of her. Everywhere he went, she went, his son Robert Jr. said. She was his #1 fan, and they were linked together, bonded together. You couldn't see one without seeing the other. Here we have another pastor. See, I kind of got myself attached to a theme here. The pastor theme. This is Isaac Graham, who died at 67, New York City, on March 22nd. The Reverend Isaac Graham was a fun-loving guy who loved jokes and a good laugh, said his daughter, the Reverend Courtney Tolbert. He was a great husband to my mother and a great dad to me. And he was a great grandfather to those girls you hear in the background, Courtney said, from her home in Harlem, New York. Isaac poured everything else he had into his church, the Macedonia Baptist Church of Harlem, where he was pastor for more than 4 decades. He had a great love of God and a great love of people, Courtney said, and his congregation of nearly 200 loved him back. Isaac, who wrote 30 books, traveled the country to mentor other church leaders. He also served with more than a dozen organizations in his community, including as the police liaison for the NYPD's 30th Precinct and a trustee of the Upper Manhattan Mental Health Center. Isaac, who had diabetes that was under control, got sick in mid-March and died on March 22nd, it's a Sunday. Courtney was at the church ministering that morning and got word right after 11 a.m. that her father had died. I know he was at peace, Courtney said. He was telling me, I'm happy because you're doing what I taught you to do. And the last one I want to bring into the room, her name is Desanne Romaine. She died on March 23rd. At 36, she was a high school principal in New York City. To the students and teachers at Brooklyn Democracy Academy, Principal Desanne Romaine was leader, mother, hairdresser, basketball partner, educator, and inspiration. Ms. Romaine, she is the brightest thing in everyone's life, said a former student, Judith Atongi. Desanne, 36, was the first New York City public school official to die from the coronavirus. She had an infectious smile and a Michelle Obama aura, students and colleagues say. She's incredible, said another former student, Bree Sledge. She's a life changer. She's a mother even though she didn't have kids. We were her children. That's one thing I value about her, how important she made us feel. Desanne, who emigrated from Trinidad to an inner-city school in Queens, had an unshakable motivation to inspire the typically under-resourced students at the school. She wanted to give them an opportunity to excel, dream without limitations, and to ultimately achieve the American dream, said Mohammed Q. Amen, Desanne's friend, because she achieved the American dream. Often it's like so frightening when so many people die from a common cause that's pretty mysterious very rapidly. And I think I've become fascinated with that it means something when a large amount of people all die from the same cause. And that bringing to mind these personalities, these strong characters, what that means for what's going on, and a sort of mirror image in the spiritual world at that moment. I had a strong experience of that when my father died right before the election, the 2016 election. And that moment, what that moment in time ushered into all our lives, and the way in which those who have died continue to participate in pivotal and dramatic battles on the earthly plane that then have their counterpart in the spiritual one. So I've been thinking about those people that I just told you about, and how powerful they must be in the spiritual world for whatever's going on this right now. So I was going to read a little prayer, but I also wanted to, before closing that sort of moment with them, or this improvised kind of memorial service, if there's anything that anybody wanted to say.
Feeling the soul abundance of these great individuals. They're so powerful.
So that was 5 of, let's see, 875,000 plus 6,000 who died yesterday. Since the beginning of the virus. This is a short verse by Rudolf Steiner. Ye who watch over souls in the spheres, ye who work on souls in the spheres, ye spirits who, in protection of men's souls, work lovingly out of the wisdom of worlds. Hear our prayers, behold our love, which would unite with your helping streaming forces, divine spirit, or divining spirit, radiating love. Okay. So, oh, hi, Gareth. Welcome. Somewhere there. Hi, Gareth.
Hi.
Hi. Nice to have you with us.
Thanks. Sorry I'm coming half an hour late. I just saw the email and figured I'd stop in.
Yeah, thanks for stopping in. We just had a little bit of a memorial service for several of the people. I heard a couple little excerpts of some of the people who have died from the coronavirus. But it's a perfect moment because we're kind of transitioning.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah. Gareth, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Nice.
Where I'm teaching at the Emerson Waldorf High School there. And we just started back for a couple days online, but then back in person on Thursday. Outside, open air.
Yeah. Beautiful.
I'm finishing to eat, so I'm just gonna put my video off for a little bit.
Totally fine. Good. We also don't mind watching you eat, but do what you feel. Okay, so yeah, there's been a lot of correlation made, right, between the 1918 what's known as the Spanish flu pandemic and what we're experiencing now. Of course, there can be a response to that that's like, what are you talking about? Like, 50 million people died in 1918. We're nowhere near that. But in terms of there not being a vaccine for something and the non-pharmaceutical measures being taken, like social distancing, mask wearing, hands washing, no large events, all those were have really been the same. It's interesting too, just to note like a quick little tidbit, a lot of what we know about that 1918 flu pandemic is because of in the like 1980s is when scientists took it upon themselves to like recreate the flu, and that happened largely from digging up one Inuit woman's body whose lungs had been totally preserved, and that's where they were able to find the virus and then reproduced it genetically. So I just thought that, anyway, that was an interesting little tidbit also culturally. So 1918, obviously, like we were in the height of, or maybe not the height, but World War I was raging. And it was a very tumultuous time also socially. And that again is like for me, is a helpful way to then just try to imagine the way in which, right, these social movements kind of interact with these health crises. And I know it's a mystery, you know, how those interweave, but it just seems clear from the way that it's happened also historically that somehow those two things are connected. And here we are, it's a little bit past 100 years of that pandemic, which is also striking to me, just in terms of numbers. We're obviously just past the 100-year mark of Waldorf education, and approaching the 100 years of Steiner's death. At that time in 1918, it was like a very heightened time in his life as well. That was really when the social movement, the threefold social order, he was really trying to implement that at a pretty high level of society. And there were all kinds of riots on the street, you know, Marxists, anarchists, just these like battling social groups that would get quite violent. And that was the year where there was an assassination attempt on Steiner's life as well, because of those heightened social tensions. That, of course, I mean, Pasteur's germ theory really came at the end of the 1800s, but that, I mean, in large part affected the way in which the whole pandemic, Spanish flu pandemic, was perceived and responded to. And that, in large part, is what we are working with today, too. So it's 100 years since the flu pandemic, and it's 10 years since the H1N1 virus, which is another, just these cycles of illnesses are interesting to me. All of which have been, lung, breathing related. So I wonder if we think about today, like at that point, the early 1900s, like the medical movement was really like taking its stand in terms of becoming the new priests of society, kind of dictating our relationship to life and to death. And I wonder if we look now, at kind of the larger approach or response to the fact that we die, and how our social institutions are framed around that, particularly the medical model. Maybe we could just talk some about that. What are some of your perceptions of how we live with death as a society?
I mean, I think one of the fundamental relationships to death at large is that we lose something, and that's kind of, it's an interesting, I feel like studying the relationship of death can be almost like its own study of history in terms of consciousness. So yeah, death is almost like a revelation of the evolution of human being, because clearly in the anthroposophical view, death is just a continuation, and like a metamorphosis of the human being. But all of our institutions kind of treat it as something really scary, something burdensome, and something that really actually like reflects. It's almost like we perceive death as confining us into the world, which makes us very like possessive of the world. But if we perceive death as like a portal that expressed the eternal nature of the world, then we would probably be less possessive of stuff, and like the stuff of ourselves, kind of. So yeah, I think death, maybe there's ways to like introduce institutions around death that maybe treat it as this very conscious like continuation, and not just like a comfort. Like right now that consciousness is almost like a comforting thing, like, oh, don't worry, like they're looking over you. But if we really as a culture believed like, now this person's dying, let's help them transition, what does it mean for us to aid them in that transition, as like a, now knowing that they're excarnate, that would be a whole different experience.
Which we are in some ways, like sorry, Glacy, just quickly. In some ways, like the aging process is a fairly new one for us. Like it's only been a couple hundred years, I guess, since we've been living after 38 years old or something like that. So there's this like long extended period of dying that is a relatively modern experience. And so in some ways you'd think we're sort of set up for that. Like you have, what are you doing in that time? If not some form of preparation for death. And just quickly, when you were talking, Lucian, it also made me think of the Truckees, which is a small Micronesian society. They believe that you actually die at 40, that you start dying at 40. So their whole society is formed around that idea. So as a young person up until 40, you're doing things that require physical strength. And then after 40, you transition into doing things that require mental strength, because you are actually in the process of dying. And that's such a radically different, right, approach, to think that the dying process actually happens while you're still alive, and not just as a deterioration of your physical body after 70. Sorry, Glacy, you were going to say something too.
Don't be sorry. I remember watching the movie, The Tibetan Book of the Dead, and it was my first time I heard about death in this process of entering a different dimension, or the spirit entering a different dimension, and how they cater for the body, and this whole waking process that you have. And the Dalai Lama, he would say things like the body is just a garment that embodies the spirit. And he's, in his very cute, sweet way, he would say, like, I do get excited. It's like going to the closet and just getting a new dress, right? Because that's essentially what the physical body is. It's just a vehicle for the spirit. And that was my first time thinking about death. And since this pandemic has started, living in a community that is so diverse, and there are people who really truly fear death, and not only for themselves, for the other as well, and trying to navigate what it is that you feel, and how you are related to death, and how the other is also experiencing, how to support the other in their process, but without getting overwhelmed by it. And I think for me, it's hard to think about this pandemic. It's how many people have died alone, right, in completely isolation, and what that does to the spirit of that individual that has passed in a hospital. And you can't have a wake, and you can't have a memorial, you can't be surrounded by your loved ones, and how much the people surrounding this person who has died has to bring out of themselves to envelop that person without being physical present, but how to reach them in a way that is still enveloping and caring for them without being able to actually be physically present, like Zoom now, right? Which we are not physically present, but we are trying so much to hold one another and be with one another and extend our souls and spirits to that much that you can actually be in touch and being connected. So for me, this whole thing has been thinking about it, how many people are dying alone in a hospital, I don't know, with tubes, and what that does to your process of release or leaving your body behind. But also thinking karmically how pandemic happened. I don't know, it's like it's something that was already set in stone, it's gonna happen, or it's something that just changed the course of the earth evolution and human evolution, and then some just chosen to join that path. I have so many questions around, no answers, just questions that I also have been living with since this whole thing started, that it is around death and rebirth and the role of all these souls in the spirit as well, moving forward. Yeah. So it's a very interesting topic, I think, to ponder on.
Yeah, what you're saying, Glacy, makes me think of a couple different things. Well, on the one hand, on the fact that so many people have died in isolation during this time, and in a lecture that Steiner gave in that year of 1918, when he starts to speak of the way in which the dead communicate with the living. And in that, it's almost like a formulaic thing he lays out of, we're so used in the physical sphere, we're so used to saying something and having our words carry to the other person, and that being the indication of like hearing one another and being in contact. So you actually hear from outside somebody speaking to you. And for communication, for the dead's communication with us, it's actually the opposite. So that what we hear inwardly are communications from the dead, rather than listening to them outwardly. The dead speak like from within our souls. So often the thoughts we have are good ideas or things like that. You're like, oh, wow, what a great idea. Is actually like a something being spoken to us from somebody who has died. And thinking of that dying process and so many people who've died alone, and how much they're already kind of on the threshold of death in the dying process, that I'm just wondering like how many communications were coming to their loved ones from their deathbeds alone, yet still kind of forming that bridge of connection. There being a kind of conversation from the deathbed, despite the physical loneliness of despite what it looked like, Yeah.
I wanted to say something I was thinking about, and then also say that I have to leave at 1. I'm sorry to miss all of it, but I was thinking about this the other day, about feeling like there's this abstract part of death that I was sort of realizing over the winter, of like, it makes so much of my life feel meaningful, the fact that I'm going to die. Like that if I were to live infinitively, then what you do seems like almost irrelevant. And so that, like, I don't know, there's a lot of quotes I read by the poet Ross Gay. I don't know if you've heard of him, but talking about joy being as like the other, joy only being possible because of sorrow or hurt or pain, because it wouldn't be visible without something to contrast with it. So I was thinking about sort of like abstractly and being like, okay, like what I want to do is because I know that at some point in my life I will no longer exist, and so I want to make sure what I do matters to me or to anyone. And then the other part I was thinking is that, like, I think death is also just like really physical and real and not abstract, and like, you know, like there's just like when you're saying about the different sort of poles of, you know, how people are thinking about the coronavirus and death, I think like there's that pole with just death in general, that like, you know, you have someone there one day and all that grief and like the physical stuff, and then you don't have them. Yeah, I don't know, that didn't make a lot of sense, but
No, thanks, Gwen. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I think that's part of the challenge, right? Is how the fact that there is loss involved. I mean, you can't get away from the fact that there's the death is the loss of something too. And it wouldn't be what it is if it didn't have that trembling, fear and trembling associated with such a significant threshold. So how to really acknowledge that reality while holding, you know, what we'd like to hold around the idea that the spirit will live in a different form and be re-embodied.
I just had this sort of feeling of clarity when you were talking about that. I feel like the feeling of loss comes from our state of consciousness, which is that we're physical. And like, even if we look into the past, we see that people perceive their bodies differently, like they weren't as physical because they were more they're more in association with these like flowing astral forces around them. So I feel like one of the ways to bridge that gap of loss is to like endeavor to perceive the real personalities of each person around you, as opposed to these garments of concepts that they kind of express as material and abstract forms of self. But if we come into contact with the real essence of the person, we're basically coming in contact with their excarnate self, and their like self. We're basically like reversing into their descent to earth, almost like when we meditate, we reverse into we ascend through our descent and then enter into our pre-birth, which is the eternal. So if we strive to communicate with each other through that essence, as opposed to the more external, abstract concepts of each other, then when we die, we'll just kind of course, we'll experience the physical loss because we have this as part of our being, but I think we'll much easier feel in a genuine way that we're still connected to that essence, because that's what the thing that we've been communicating with and developing with each other. So it's not like we'll lose the essence, we'll just shed the garment. Which is why I think materialism is so dangerous, because it cultivates a deep relationship with that which is purely mortal, so that everything is constantly anxiety ridden with being lost. But if you cultivate your relationship with the essence of something, then nothing is lost, truly.
Thank you. I'm hearing also, yeah, in this grand disconnect, 100 years later, that the human being is not, like as a social being, it's continuing to reincarnate and repeat like a tree, like a plant. We're doing the same thing we did 100 years ago. The human, so like social human organism isn't dying at all. It's just repeating, or it's reincarnating, or whatever it is. The real things, they're like returning and returning, and there's something really funny about that in relation to the individuals who are like dying these little lives, and then there's a grand rhythm that's happening. So that's just, yeah, that's what's coming for me. It's almost proof of reincarnation, maybe. I don't know exactly how to relate to it, but it does offer something about these repeating rhythms.
Yeah, it's like in 2018 there was this big convention commemorating 100 years from the flu pandemic, sort of detailing everything we'd learned and how to be better equipped for another one. And then 2 years later we're hit with another one, but it's a totally different thing, you know. And so we respond in the same ways that we responded to the 1918 pandemic, but maybe without so much of the coordinated pandemic planning around shutting down schools and all that. I'm not saying that it was exactly the same, but because we don't have a sophisticated medical response like with a vaccine or something, we have the same, just don't go anywhere, wash your hands, cover your face. But I found that also almost a little comical to think of the 2018 convention sort of celebrating what we've come to and how to be best prepared for the next one. And then, you know, you're hit with something that you just, is totally foreign. What do you do then?
I think it's unfortunate when you look at Abigail, how you were kind of creating that connection between the flu pandemic and the start of the current medical model that we are now using today, and the scientific method, and this ultimate reliance on the medical community for all of these type of life events, and how in some way we kind of divorce ourselves from a more holistic approach of looking at life and death and illness that many traditions often had. And we kind of cut ourselves off from that and subscribe to this model. And then we come to a situation like today, and this model is failing us. This model isn't even able to support us, and we put all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak. And so we're in this predicament, and it's really, I think, a lot of it's our perception and our belief systems that we've kind of become very entrenched in, and it doesn't serve us, and this fear is just layered on top, one layer on top of the next. There's the fear that has been instilled in us that we need the medical community. We cannot survive without them. We need to immediately call our doctor. We need to immediately, because we are not capable of handling this on our own, is what we're told and what we believe. Even the most well-intentioned people who believe in, reincarnation and karma and Steiner's philosophies, and still it's like we all have kind of been, the seed has been planted in us, and so it's really hard for me to try to break away from that and step into a different reality where there isn't so much fear. And then with this COVID pandemic, you add, that's just a whole nother level of fear added on top of the normal fear that we experience around death. And that's like, it's like this, the ultimate, it almost feels to me like the ultimate fear. It's like we're all trying to avoid this at all costs. And it's like, I think if, I think about these people and if I were to get a diagnosis, and I've heard people joke about it, which is really not funny, on social media saying, sorry, I just, everybody that I've been in contact with in the last few weeks, I just got results and I'm COVID positive, and then just being, and then laughing it off, and that's not really very funny, but I think it's a real experience that people would be having right now, having that diagnosis. And so even though, it's, yeah, so it's a very interesting, I think it's really come to like this crescendo in a way. I don't think it can get much worse as far as fear around this issue of death that we have today. I think over as far as I can tell from what I've learned. And so how do we break out of that? Because that's not serving us. That's not a belief system that's serving us. Yeah. And part of that, I think, is looking at also our lives and how can we live each day as if it was our last. And, a lot of the fears maybe incorporates regrets and things that I wish I had said or done or could have done differently, or I wish I had, reconciled a friendship or said something, differently, and or gone after a dream that I've been wishing to, that I've always wanted to do. I should have just done it. So looking at that and how can we live today, in that place of going after the things and saying the things we want to say and doing the things we want to do. And I think for me, at least, that is going to help relieve some of that, I think, innate fear. And then the conditioning, societal fears, I don't have an answer for that. Just, I think it really helps learning about reincarnation and through Steiner's work, and it really does help that process. So yeah, it's a big job, deconditioning.
I could share something. Johanna, is it Johanna?
Yes.
Just at the end, I've been studying a lot about the Bible and how the idea of reincarnation was taken out intentionally to make you feel like this is it, this is your one life, by the church fathers, so not by some other group of people, but like I guess with their intention was like, yeah, that's gonna help us think in that way about the kind of urgency of getting to life. And And yet I have now, so I have the idea of reincarnation pretty strongly living in me, but yet it doesn't really change the urgency part for me. I think at one point it did, when I thought, oh, there's tons of reincarnations, wow. But actually, there's still so few, I think, in terms of like how everything evolves by the next one. I mean, this is it for Gareth. This is it. And I was just thinking about that and kind of having the feeling that imagining like when I'm not incarnated, I'm excarnated, imagining myself in kind of a heavenly, perfect, blissful state just for the purpose of theorizing. But then like coming to Earth is hard in a way. Like, okay, you got to get born and you coming down and there's all this stuff every day. But imagining that it happens so rarely, in a sense, like imagine you're up in heaven and you're waiting around and you're happy, but you just don't have an opportunity to do anything out of your own self. And then you're on Earth and then people don't know what to tell you about how you got here. But then gradually, different intentions come in. And so I've been having the feeling of, boy, like, let's get to it. I'm about to go back up. And then I'll only be down another few hundred or 1,000 years, I don't know. And then the world will be some strange virtual reality / deeper, totally different than I have here. This is the only time I'll ever be here. So I'm just like reconciling the reincarnational feeling of kind of, oh, great, it's eternal. We are eternal, thank God. But then one life, that's it. Yeah.
I want to just add some fuel to the fire that Frank was starting a little bit around the relationship between the individual human organism and the collective human. And I don't have anything specific to say in relationship to that, but I think it's an important dynamic to consider in the context of understanding the world we live in, and I appreciate Abigail, you bringing that forward in the context of these different points in human history and these kind of mass departures from human incarnation, and how all those kind of accumulate into this larger activity going on. And something about our responsibility in that, in being incarnated still, and being kind of those tips of the iceberg, of the human iceberg. And I can't really say anything more, just that I think it's a worthy sense of a worthy something to think about. Yeah.
You remind me of this thing that I'm reading about in Plato's Republic right now. I'm not sure if I actually understand this correctly, but I'm definitely understanding it in my own way. um, so he talks about a city, and Socrates is talking about the city, and how a city is actually determined by whether it's a whole or a fragment. And what determines it as a fragment is if all of the inhabitants or any of the inhabitants are not living to their highest potential. So there can be a city of people physically, geographically, but because the city is sort of, the city's truth is based on its virtue, that means that the inhabitants need to be virtuous. And if they're virtuous, that means that they are achieving their full capacity as an individual. And it just reminds me of this individual and the community, where the community actually can't really be a community unless each individual is like bringing the community into themselves. And in turn, finding their highest capacity through the community, and how like everything we offer is in relationship to everything everyone else offers. So basically it's this idea that we can't achieve wholeness, a city as like a virtue of humanity, as a wholeness can't actually be whole unless each individual is whole. And I feel like we're really experiencing that now, where like most of our systems are not actually in support of allowing people to discover their highest capacity. It's more about suppressing their potential so that they kind of like exist, that we all exist as this concept of community, but there's no real experience of that because we're not in ourselves being welcomed into a space of our highest capacity. So yeah, the question is like, how do we find our city? How do we see ourselves in our city? How do we see the virtue of the city as holding ourselves? Seems kind of relevant.
Thanks, Lucian. Just thinking of coming here to the end of our conversation, but wanting to make sure that for anyone who hasn't spoken yet, that there is that space to do so if you have something to say.
I want to say, first of all, thank you to everyone for your inspiring insights and thoughts. And so nice to be connected to, in Anthroposophy, we have so many gifts. And so it's just nice to share little tidbits with each other. One thing I'm called by a few of your comments so far is, this collective experience of the challenge of death. And, you know, individually we might have different relationships to spirit, but suddenly we're all confronted with this big question, and as relates to materialism too, right? Is I think Lucian, you said it's the danger, but it's also the seduction, right? That materialism offers us this solid ground of provable reality, and then suddenly, wait, what about what happens after we die? And how do we connect, right? And I thank you, Abigail, for reminding us that, or the picture that it comes from what we might feel on the inside. So the inner life, as cultivated by our will to do so. And it's challenging. I think it also connects to me with this idea of the individuality developing in world evolution, right? That this is our time to overcome materialism. So I guess we can welcome the challenge in that way. But yeah, it's painful. And that because death is, yeah, we do lose something. And it opens a door, but then it becomes a choice to go through it consciously. And then one other thing I had thought of in relationship to the 1918 event was a story I heard, I don't know if anybody else did, that Gandhi had a major transformation in regards to that event. I think before the pandemic of 1918 really hit hard in India in particular, he was more involved in different political action, and then he figured out in some way to take his actions in the way that we honor as his deep commitment to peaceful, nonviolent resistance. And so that's a really interesting story too that comes out of that prior challenge of humanity. So, and we can hope, I guess, that this one will lead to similar positive outcomes, but we got to go through it, I guess, right?
I'm interested in that story. Is there you able to share a reference to?
Yeah, I heard it. Yes, I heard it on Radio Lab. They did a big kind of retrospective on the 1918 flu pandemic. It's super interesting in relationship to some of the topics we've brought up here, and that story was on there. So if you know Radio Lab, you can find it. They have,
Oh. Thank you.
Beautiful. Yeah, something that I'm being heard as you're speaking about this challenge as chalice, just playing with those sounds and hearing, yeah, just that we can do that. We can meet that there. Meet that. Are we walking our way across here, Abigail, or is there something else up your sleeve?
No, I think it's that time of the day to part ways. I guess I would just want to point maybe again, and I think this connects to what Gareth shared too, of just the importance of who we are as individuals, just that individual element, in terms of the challenge and in terms of the importance of the individual after death as well. And just bringing to mind again, maybe I'll just say their names again, the people who I brought at the beginning as a sort of touchstone of that, of the human biography, and how that's what we have, that's what we're working with to confront these challenges that are not just on the individual level, but are on on the evolutionary one, and yet it's through the particular. So not to lose track of that, because I also think it can be a tendency for those of us, not just in anthroposophy, but who feel connected to spiritual life and spiritual development, that some of those pictures become comforts again for a sort of fear of life and the loss of it. So I find it so nourishing to like connect again and again to individual stories and remember that's that's the way to sort of like ground ourselves on the earth with the people that we're here with right now. And that those who have just recently passed are on the earth too, in the earth sphere. So that was Pastor Kevlin Jones Sr., Bishop Robert Earl Smith Sr., Isaac Graham, and Desanne Romaine. We thank you for your lives, for your courage and your work and your inspiration. So nice to spend time with you guys this beginning of September. Frank, you want to take us out?
Thank you, Abigail.
Yeah, thank you so much, Abigail. So awesome. This has been a great space. Thank you all for how you brought yourselves, and always grateful that we could honor this threshold. Maybe we can do backwards. Ariel, Paul, if you do have that verse on hand, let's do them.
Yeah, I can bring it. Want to also just say that. Sorry, there's that. Now we're discussing what to put in the bag, what clothes to put in the bag. Got through the food thing. Just that we're studying this book. We're just starting this study of the Foundation Stone meditation. This book by Willem van Emmechoven. Every second Monday at 3 Pacific, 6 Eastern. We just had our kind of opening session 2 weeks ago, and just starting this coming Monday, so it's still kind of a good time to jump in if you're interested and finding that a really powerful way of deepening into some of the questions that we've been exploring today. And also just felt like wanted to put in this, if anybody's interested in knowing more about the indigenous landscape and kind of traditional territories where they live, there's a little website, nativeland.ca, that you could put in. It has a whole map of the world, actually, with traditional territories kind of overlaid on it. There's a bunch of information there, so I'm going to put that up too.
Johanna, what time's the study at? 6 o'clock Eastern?
Yep. 3 o'clock Pacific, 6 o'clock Eastern.
Everyone should join if you can.
Yeah, you can email North American Youth Section at Gmail, or anyone here, if you want the link to. I was trying to put we should probably have it on the website too. But yeah, if you didn't already get it, you might already got it in there. Okay. You have that, Ariel Paul there?
Yeah, here we go. Whoa. Crazy how far we've come already in the year. Powerful light from the silent periphery lives on in me as the light of the soul. It shines from the soul into the depths of spirit. In the vast cycles of time, soul light will bring forth fruit as the human self ripens to maturity within the cosmic self.
The light from worldwide spaces works on within with living power, transformed to light of soul. It shines into the spirit depths to bring to birth the fruits, whereby out of the self of worlds, the human self in course of time shall ripen. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Everyone.
Yeah, thank you all.
Everybody.
Thank you.